in a very big city. Her name was Amra, and she was a very lovable woman. Amra had so many friends who always visited her home. Whenever they came visiting, they fell asleep on her couch for hours. Many believed that her house was so comfortable, hence why people slept when they visited. Little did they know that Amra was not who they thought she was. Amra, to everyone that knew her, was a playful and lovable woman. Everyone loved Amra, and she knew how to make people laugh. She was the life of every party, and people could not help but love her. However, behind her charming laughter was a secret so dark that no one could imagine. Everyone who visited her home ended up falling asleep on her couch, and each time they dozed off, she stood over them and whispered words that no one could understand. By the time they woke up, they felt a weakness that they could not explain. Everyone believed that it was the comfort of her home. They believed that Amra's energy was so calming that it made them fall asleep. What they did not know was that the truth was far more serious than they could ever imagine. Amra placed a mark on their bodies, a tattoo so small and hidden in a part of their body that could not be easily seen. Some had the tattoo inscribed on their back, while some others had it inside their nostrils, places that one would not easily see or suspect. The tattoo was a snake that gained access to the body of people who she had successfully marked. The weakness they felt was the snake draining their energy to be able to control their body fully. They thought they were living their own lives, making their own decisions, but in reality, they were puppets being controlled by a string, strings that were tied to Amra's hands. With every mark she placed, her power grew stronger and her reach spread further into the city. She used it to gain access to influential people who she controlled with the snake that whispered into their hearts, bending their will without them even realizing it. But no one suspected Amra. They still laughed with her and called her their friend. To them, she was the shining star of every gathering, the one person who brought joy wherever she went. What they did not know was that Amra's laughter was not laughter at all. It was the hiss of the snake, feeding from within their soul. One day, Amra met a young man whose name was Jason. He was handsome, rich, and had a smile that could melt the hardest of hearts. Amra was stranded in the rain, and Jason offered to give her a lift. He had no idea who she was, beyond the beautiful, grateful woman who smiled at him as she stepped into his car. Jason was happily married with two children, who he loved with all of his heart. In fact, that night was his seventh wedding anniversary, and Jason was hurrying home to surprise his wife before he met Amra stranded by the roadside. His plan was to drop her off quickly and head home to his beautiful wife, who was all dressed and waiting. However, when they arrived at Amra's house, she began to fake an asthma attack. Jason ransacked her bag for an inhaler. He administered it to her and decided to help her into her home. What Jason did not know was that life as he knew it was about to end. He stepped into her house and helped her to a chair in the living room. His sweetness clung to the air, rich and inviting, and Jason found himself praising the scent before he even realized the words had left his mouth. Amra thanked him for saving her life, her eyes gleaming with something Jason could not explain. "Just rest a little before you go. You look tired," she said to Jason, who shook his head, insisting that he had to leave. "No, my wife is waiting. It's our anniversary tonight, and we have something planned out already," he said as his limbs grew heavy and his vision blurred. Jason sat down just for a moment, and that moment was all that Amra needed. Within minutes, he was asleep just like the others. Amra stood over him, smiling. She whispered the ancient words, and the snake mark etched itself onto his back. The serpent slid into him as it curled around his spirit. When Jason finally opened his eyes again, he felt so strange, like something inside of him had shifted. He apologized awkwardly, blaming the sleep on tiredness as he hurried home. His wife, Kimberly, had been waiting for hours, dressed beautifully, as tears poured down her eyes from worrying. She had called him over 10 times, and Jason was not answering. When he arrived home, Kimberly expected a form of explanation, but Jason ignored her completely as he went to bed. No apology, no remorse, and Kimberly could not believe her eyes. She confronted Jason, who picked up his pillows and went to sleep on the living room sofa. What's the point of celebrating our wedding anniversary when I have to come back to your constant nagging? He asked his wife, who stood there in disbelief. Jason had never spoken to her with such a tone. He was the sweetest person she had ever met. In their 7 years of marriage, Jason never raised his voice on her. He never dismissed her tears, never talked down on her no matter what. Kimberly's heart sank as she stared at the man who looked so much like her husband but somehow did not feel like him. The days that followed saw Jason's complete transformation. The man who once adored his wife now ignored her completely. The father, who once laughed with his children, now shouted at them for the smallest mistakes. He stayed out late and on most days did not return home at all. His wife's heart shattered as she shed tears that she had never shed in their 7 years of marriage. The laughter that once filled their home vanished and was replaced by complete silence and fear. His children tiptoed around him, too scared to call him daddy, as they always did. Jason now belonged to Amra. Every smile he gave his wife was hollow. Every word to his children was sharp. He spent his time with Amra, drawn to her house like a moth to a deadly flame. And each time he fell asleep on her couch, the snake's hold on him grew tighter, twisting him into a man his family could no longer recognize. His wife, Kimberly, could not understand what was happening. She tried speaking to Jason, but their conversations always ended with angry screams. Jason was not willing to listen to her. He blamed her for everything that was happening and even encouraged her to leave if she was fed up of their marriage. He began to lock his phone with a password, making it difficult for his wife to gain access to it. He stopped providing money for his family, saying that if they needed anything, then they should work for it. Jason missed his children's birthdays. Even when his first son was sick, he asked his wife why she was disturbing him with it. After all, he's not dead, so what is the fuss all about? He said to Kimberly, whose mouth opened in shock to hear such vile words from her husband. Kimberly could barely believe it. The man who once kissed their children goodnight and prayed over them was now a stranger in his own home. Jason no longer cared for the little things that made their family whole. Birthdays, dinners, anniversaries. His heart had grown colder with each passing day, and his soul seemed to drift farther away from them. But what Kimberly did not know was that every time Jason laid on Amra's couch, the serpent inside him tightened its claws. Neighbors began to whisper. They noticed Jason's absence from family outings, his sudden change of behavior, his constant visit to Amra's house. Some even suggested Kimberly was no longer a good wife, that perhaps she had driven her husband into another woman's arms. The rumors caught her deeply, but she could not defend herself. How could she explain something she did not understand? At night, Kimberly cried herself to sleep while her children clung to her. Their once joyful home was now filled with tension and fear. Jason's footsteps at the door made their hearts race, not with excitement, but with dread. One evening, Kimberly confronted him again, desperate to save her family. Jason, she pleaded, tears streaming down her face. What has happened to you? This isn't the man I married. Jason turned to her, his eyes dark and distant. Maybe this is who I've always been, and you are just too blind to see it. His words pierced her like a knife as Kimberly fell to her knees sobbing. She could feel her marriage slipping through her fingers, and she had no power to stop it. Just as she sat there, Jason picked up his car keys and drove out of the house. It was already 10 p.m., and Kimberly could not understand where he was going by that time of the night. Filled with so much curiosity, she decided to trail him. As they arrived at Amra's house, Kimberly watched from a distance as Amra hugged her husband and took him into the house. Her heart crumbled at the sight of this. Her husband, The man who once swore eternal love to her was now holding another woman in his arms. Her tears poured like a fountain as she returned home, feeling broken and dejected. The next morning, when Jason returned, Kimberly was waiting. Her face was pale, her eyes swollen from crying, but her voice remained steady. Jason, she said, blocking the doorway before he could pass. I followed you last night. I saw you at that woman's house. Tell me the truth. What is really going on? Jason looked at her with eyes that no longer belonged to him. Kimberly, he said flatly, I don't need to hide anything from you anymore. Amra is the one I love. She makes me feel alive in ways you never could. I don't love you anymore. The words shattered Kimberly into 1,000 pieces. Her knees buckled as she clutched the door frame for support. In all their years together, through every fight and trial, Jason had never spoken with such cruelty. Jason, she whispered, choking back sobs as she began to speak. We have children together, Jason. We have a family. How can you say this? But Jason brushed past her coldly, as if her pain meant nothing to him. Kimberly could not hide her pain. She was so broken and desperate that she decided to pay Amra a visit. She knocked at the door, her hands trembling as Amra opened the door and smiled at her. Amra looked so radiant, her laughter ringing sweetly as though Kimberly's sorrow were melodies to her ears. Please, Kimberly begged Amra to leave her husband alone. I don't know what you've done to him, but I'm here to beg you to please leave him alone. Jason had been so mean to us, and this has affected our children who miss their father so much.